even myself, this conversation might not even be you. It could just be a deep fake of
That's
Craig
true.
Ford.
You never know, right?
I've just generated, I've made it up. So, hello and welcome to another episode of the Man in the Middle podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Malloy. This is an Educator podcast. My special guest today is a man by the name of Craig Ford, and he's the founder of Cyber Unicorns, and it's an innovative cybersecurity consultancy which focuses on empowering small to medium-sized businesses with accessible, high-quality cyber protection. Craig has over 20 years of experience across both red and blue teams, and he's worked as a virtual CISO consultant, helping organizations helping strengthen their security position. But beyond his work in the field, Craig is also an accomplished author, and he uses storytelling to actually break down complex cyber topics for everyday people. His probably most well-known book series is called A Hacker I Am, and that brings cybersecurity to life through scenarios and stories. So today we're going to explore a bit of Craig's approach to cybersecurity, making it more relatable, his mission in cyber education, and then also talking around that position of storytelling in cybersecurity. So with that being said, Craig, I want to welcome you to the show and appreciate you coming on board to chat with us.
No, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm pretty excited to get in the conversation.
Yeah, me too. And I always like to start these conversations from sort of the origin. And for you, Craig, I'd like to actually ask you first, how did you get into this world of cybersecurity? Where did it begin for you?
It's a little funny. I was probably, I'd say I was probably about 7 or 8 years into my sort of IT support, IT kind of background sort of roles. I'd started down a little sort of traineeship with a little IT shop in my hometown and sort of worked my way up and sort of was building that experience. But I was sort of got to a point where I was like, where am I going to go from here? Am I going to stay as a support person or an admin for the rest of my career, or would I sort of make that next sort of step up into that IT manager sort of CIO type scenario, which I thought I wanted to be a CIO. So I decided I'd go get some formal qualifications in a master's degree. So I signed up for an IT master's and I did a couple of digital forensics and incident response units just because I really thought they sounded cool. And that was literally the only reason. I was like, oh, that sounds pretty interesting. I would do that. And I did a couple of the digital forensics unit and I kind of loved it. And I'm like, this is kind of the space for me, sort of pulling things apart, following those breadcrumbs. And then, I instantly basically changed my track of where I wanted to be in my sort of career. And cyber's been my passion ever since, and I sort of love it. But
yeah, and it's kept you, like you said, passionate and interested in the area. No doubt, especially like over those 20 plus years, there's been so much evolving in the industry and a lot to keep up with, and I guess keep it fascinating for you, right?
Yeah, very much. And particularly when I sort of started in the cyberspace, like it was at the time where, the cyber people were still sort of hidden in those sort of back rooms somewhere. You sort of, and we've kind of, I guess, come from the shadows and come out sort of in plain sight now, and everyone sees this, and it's definitely a changed industry. I think it's for better, but yeah, it's much different from when I first started. And there was a lot of, you had to be in that kind of cyber kind of group or that cyber club to sort of get in that inner circle and sort of get that access. But yeah, now it's much more open and much more diverse, which is nice. So.
Yeah, excellent. And like we were saying at the top of the episode, Craig, you beyond the work that you do, you also have authored several books, and we mentioned one of those being the series A Hacker I Am. I want to ask you just more generally, what role does storytelling play within the cybersecurity industry, and how do you feel yourself being a part of that process? Why is it so important to you?
There was sort of storytelling to me, I think, is an easy way to sort of take some very, very technical sort of subjects and make them a little bit more palatable, a bit more easy to consume. My first book, The Hacker I Am one, was kind of born out of my dislike for your normal university cybersecurity books. They were sort of really heavy, really dry, and really sort of hard to consume, particularly as that external person coming in or someone that's a little bit less technical. It was very, very difficult to sort of, get that insight. And I sort of, as a very technical person with that background, even I found it a bit hard to sort of absorb some of that. So I'm like, it's got to be able to be done a little bit easier, a little bit better. So I created the Hacker IM so it was more approachable, used the stories because it's kind of my natural way of sort of doing that translation and that sort of easier sort of putting across topics. So I think I've even taught cybersecurity best practices, like the basics, with Three Little Pigs. So it's literally, you just got to pick your audience, what is an easy thing to consume, what would make sense to them, what's something that they can translate that into their sort of normal lives and their everyday kind of lives. And I think if you can really find that way they can connect to something, you'll by far get more of a retention of whatever you're teaching them and whatever that lesson is. It'll sink in much better. But particularly with cyber, I find it is so technical a lot of the time, and particularly when you're talking about cyber awareness and cyber education, when people are trying to teach it, they still stick to the technical side of things. And it's like most everyday people don't understand it. So we need to use the stories to go, how can you relate to whatever we're trying to teach you, and how does that, make sense in your kind of world? So, but yeah, stories 100% the best way to get a translation across from something hugely technical to something that actually makes sense to everyday people. And I'm surprisingly quite good at that whole translation, which is why I think I'm up to book number 6 now. So it's crazy.
Yeah, many more to come, no doubt, as well. Because
Yeah,
well, it sounds like that you've had a lot of success from the point of view of, from the cyber education point of view. So those who are, pursuing, say, a career in cyber, like the storytelling method can be super useful for them. But it also sounds like, in what I think you, sort of hinted at and touched on there as well, from a wider public awareness point of view. Do you think that the storytelling can actually be, if not as useful, more useful from that standpoint as well?
yeah, I think so. Particularly that general public kind of education, and I'm sort of pushing that as the cyber unicorns. That's the reason it was kind of born originally, to sort of push that general public cyber education. But I think that storytelling and giving the ability to relate to it. So, because if you're just sitting there going, you need strong passwords and you need MFA, and then they're going, oh, but it's painful, I don't want to do it. But if you can give a story and break it down and go, here's why it's a good idea, and then they go, oh, hang on, this actually makes sense. This actually is a good thing for me to pay attention to, and they'll absorb that a bit better. But it 100% works. I get much more of an effective, I guess you would say, buy-in and sort of engagement when you use a story over just trying to tell them they need to do it or trying to push that path down on them. But yeah, definitely much better with the awareness. With any kind of story, I think, doesn't matter what, even if it's not cyber, I think any type of story to translate something that's a bit technical is, yeah, a good approach.
Yeah, so like it's definitely something like closely aligned with what we see as well, as far as storytelling being like a really good translator and a way for easier to relate to, but also easier to
Yep.
remember as well. Like
Yep.
there's something within us that we remember stories a lot better than sort of technical based information that's just thrown at us. So, but I guess keeping in line with the uh, cyber awareness side of things, Craig, could you tell us, like, from your experience, what are like sort of the top security tips you give to just sort of like the general public and families out there who would like to stay safe online in this digital world that we're a part of?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's probably part of that whole, that standard foundation, because I always think if you can get those very basic stuff right, I think you can at least build from there and improve from that. So usually it's around, with a few stories, I usually do it. That's kind of my style. But I normally would sort of, what I would do is I would tell them a story about a scenario, break it back down and sort of pull that curtain back and show them those sort of issues that sort of happen in the background, and then walk them through why MFA might be able to help them resist some of these attacks. And then, your passwords, why a good size length one, and, talking around that basic cyber education with using like a password manager or something to make sure you have different passwords. But yeah, generally, if you can stick to those, real simple basics like MFA, it's, yes, some users find it slightly painful and annoying, but it definitely can help you sort of, push back some of those malicious actors. Not a silver bullet, but still definitely worthwhile having. And then you've got your strong passphrase is definitely better. I think we've finally, as the industry, finally caught on the fact that a passphrase is better. The fact that you can actually remember them, which is nice, instead of trying to type it 50 times to get the same complex password in. And then, if you go down the path of just making sure that they have a solid backup plan and making sure that they can actually restore stuff, those 3 simple, basic things, nothing overly complicated. But if they can particularly as that general audience, most of them, if they can start sort of, even in a corporate world, I usually say if you can teach them to use these three things and these three basics in their home world, in their home environment, they bring that common sense back to work. So it actually gives you that dual effect, and it actually is quite effective. But so yeah, stick to the three basics. Once you get past that, if you start to get that down pat, you start doing that really well. Add in a password manager on top of that, make sure you got some decent antivirus. But yeah, three basics at bare minimum. Definitely do that. And if you can convince them to do updates, that's really nice as well.
That's great. From like the small to medium-sized business perspective, because we were speaking just before around how, the practices that you recommend to just general individuals with how they interact online certainly translates into, how you work within the sort of format of being in a business or a company. I guess when you do go into consult with companies like this, are there certain, let's call them myths, like are there certain myths that you come across when you're, speaking to individuals in the company, or are there certain ideas that prevail there before they get to speak to a professional like yourself?
Just trying to think of what sort of myths come out. There is certainly some misconceptions, and I think, particularly around the cyber education kind of side of things, a lot of organizations still think, once a year or once every, 2 quarters is a good time to do sort of that education, and that whole, when we have compliance, it's enough for security. I think that there's definitely still a few of those, but a lot of the time, I think that what I find is usually that translation from that, external viewpoint with what sort of that basics is at their home sort of environment does cross over really well. But I think usually in that sort of corporate environment, they just sort of need to take it to that next step and just sort of help them manage that sort of process and put those sort of, gateways and simple things in place to make it a little bit easier. But yeah, I'm sure there is, I can't think of anything really sort of out there that would be kind of entertaining to the listeners, but yeah, there would definitely be a few myths, I'm sure, that sort of would pop up quite a lot. But.
Yeah, and as far as making it, like for those, again, like generally you're dealing with people that, don't have that education. What are some of the things you do to make it accessible for them when you're coming in to, raise the level of security they have within their organization?
I think a lot of the time I usually do, because I take a similar approach to what we're sort of talking about. I always go, let's focus on trying to uplift their personal security process and what they do in their own environment. Because I think that I think about 80% of the time you see a real translation in the awareness and the benefits inside the organization. So normally what I do is I go right down to that very basics, like they know nothing about how to keep themselves safe online, and really start at that very bare minimum and slowly work our way up in that maturity. So anything from, talking about how to keep what they should share on social media, around, what you can do with photos and stuff they share, and sort of really that raw online safety, those kind of basics, and then cross over into that breaking down and giving that sort of education around why the passwords need to be a certain way, why the longer is better, and actually give them some real translation across some of that so it actually makes sense. Because a lot of the time you see it with a lot of the online education platforms, a lot of the time they just blurt, you need a secure password, this is why it is, but they don't give the why. And I think the why is very important. We need to give the why so that, they will do that, buy in and go, okay, this is something I actually should contribute to, I should get involved with. So, but yes, definitely keep it at the very basics. Don't try and make it overcomplicated, because then you start losing people and they start disengaging. And you can kind of see it when you do awareness sessions and stuff. You can see people starting to pull back a little bit and just sort of look at their phones and start phasing out. So you can tell when you're starting to lose them. So you just sort of need to pull it back and sort of bring them back in a little bit and make it sort of more relevant to them. But
yeah, no, you said like something really interesting there as far as like getting buy-in from them, and I think what you said that as far as like them understanding the why of what they're doing certain things. So, and is that kind of where that storytelling as well comes into place, Craig, as far as like understanding the why behind different activities or different things that they might be doing to keep themselves protected, for example? Is that sort of where that comes in as well?
yeah, very much, because if you can with sort of the stories, like even with that Three Little Pigs I mentioned earlier, like if you can give them the connection to going, oh, that's kind of a scenario that makes sense to me. I kind of understand that. Oh, maybe that is something that could happen to me. But if you can give them that why it's important, that really connection to it, then they're more likely to remember it as well as try and go, oh, how can I be a little bit better in this space? Pay a bit more attention and start really absorbing it and connecting to it. But if you can't get the why, you've pretty much lost them straight away. You would just get that slight improvement every now and then, a little bit with the awareness, but you'll never really get them to pull that level right up. But I find if you can find whatever it is that they will connect to, even the users that some organizations will go are our bad users, our weakest links. I don't like the word weakest link. I think everyone that learns at their own pace. I think humans are actually our biggest asset if we can sort of bring them in and sort of educate them quite well. But if you can get the users that are having trouble absorbing some of this, find what it is that makes sense to them or what works for them and what helps them understand it, and you will 100% get a better sort of process and outcome from them. So, but yeah, find the why. Whatever the why is that will connect them is what you need to do.
Yeah, great. I love it. And that sounds like a really important feature of the, from cyber awareness point of view. But I want to ask you, Craig, you've been a virtual CISO, and I guess I want to ask as far as the value that having a virtual CISO can bring to a company as opposed to, say, other more traditional ways of engaging with cybersecurity consultancy. How's you seen like sort of the value of that position for companies out there?
I think particularly with myself, I'm sort of that virtual CISO or fractional CISO or whatever you want to call it, essentially, which is basically just a part-time CISO. So it kind of works for the organizations, particularly we're talking, usually about 1,000 seats below. Most of mine are around that sort of 1,000 to probably about 500 seat organizations. And what it is they don't really have a need for a full-time CISO in their environment to sort of help them push along, but it gives them access to that, I guess you'd say, that understanding and that maturity sort of push and strategy that they wouldn't normally get access to by bringing someone in, and that sort of not quite ad hoc, it's sort of, but sort of that more part-time, I guess, is probably the best way to do it, and sort of help them build strategy and direction and really push that maturity level. Because a lot of the time it's more around, how do I do this? Where do we go? Where do we take this to the next level so we are actually doing the right things? Because it's understanding a lot of the time is where the benefit comes from. And usually it's a bit of a journey for myself and for them, sort of going, so let's figure out exactly kind of where you are and really take them along that journey and sort of help them lift into that maturity state. And it actually works quite well. It gives them a little bit more, access to a more skilled kind of, CISO or, IT or security manager that they wouldn't normally get to. So it gives them that little bit more of a benefit and not quite as expensive because they sort of only paying for part of the time and not that full-time sort of allocation, which a lot of those organizations couldn't afford and don't really need. So I think it works quite well, particularly for that small to mid. Like if you look in that middle ground space, probably the really small organizations, they would be a lot less sort of consuming. It would be more around, let's just quick figure out the basics, how you can push along the maturity. But yeah, that mid-sized enterprise, definitely a benefit.
Yeah, like that mid-size who, can really be allocating the right resources and like I said, not have the need or even the ability to have someone internal to do that. So like having that outsourced model, but leveraging the experience like someone like yourself has as well can be really beneficial, right?
Yeah. And a lot of the time, like those clients use and sort of, I guess you would say, I am really their internal CISO. They treat me like I am their CISO. It's just they don't consume as that full-time kind of hours because they don't need that time, that sort of volume of hours or time. So usually that first, month or two as you're starting to really build out strategy and stuff is a little bit more heavy. But after that, it's sort of, let's continue pushing that maturity up and keep working towards that goal because there's no perfect in security. It's just around continuing to make it a little bit better each day, and that's all you can do.
Yeah, great. Just to, I guess, like finish up around this area, Craig, like how would a company, I guess, know it's the right time to engage someone like yourself to have like a virtual CISO within their organization?
It's a bit of a tricky answer. it kind of depends on the organizations, and most of the time I say if they get to a point where they've, kind of got some of that basics in place and they're kind of feel like they're a little lost, they don't really know where that next step is and how they continue to improve. I usually find it's better to engage somebody, even if it's not that full-time CISO, but sort of get that advice externally to go, how can we take from what we are now to sort of keep pushing in that right journey, even if it is strategy only that they get advice on of how to keep pushing that. I think it's a good idea, but usually it gets to a point where they've, got a one or two internal IT person, or, they have that external MSP and they're kind of lost a little bit to what that next step is as far as security wise. That's usually when that sort of benefit comes in, because then you can formally put something around it and sort of give them that real advice in that right direction. But yeah, it's a bit of a hard, tricky spot, but usually most organizations kind of come to that understanding themselves where that's kind of as far as they can take it themselves with their own internal kind of team, and they need that help to sort of push it to that next spot.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, and I want to ask around again, like the cyber awareness piece, because I know in the past something you've spoken on and been passionate about is, I guess, raising the level of cyber awareness to be akin to something, say, like, sort of like skin cancer awareness or drink driving, campaigns that we have in Australia and, in other countries as well. I guess from that perspective, Craig, like what's your vision for bringing the level of cybersecurity awareness to that kind of caliber that those other types of areas have?
Yeah, I think I've been talking about I think it's the slip, slop, slap campaign. I always usually compare it to
Yeah.
the sunscreen kind of campaign. And I have been talking about it for years, which is kind of why Cyber Unicorns was made. It was sort of what I got that passion to sort of, I think as an industry, we've kind of ignored the general public. So your seniors, your mums and dads, your general public kind of space where, we teach them in, the corporate space, and even kids. I think kids we've kind of ignored to a point. But I think if we're talking about cyber education, my general direction is I think if we can start with the kids and sort of educate them in that sort of primary school to high school kind of level and really embed cyber education with them to start with. And then by the time they get to the corporate environment, we're not breaking bad habits. We're actually just reinforcing and re-educating and sort of uplifting continually. So, because that's what I think our biggest issue a lot of the time in corporate is we're trying to break years and years of bad habits to try and get them to do it a different way, which as adults, we kind of resist a lot of the time. We like to stick to our habits, but I think, yeah, the general public, that's the bigger audience. That's the bigger impact we can make as an industry if we can cover that, because there's more people outside of those big corporate organizations than there is if you look at Australia with the volume of small businesses. If we can educate them, we're going to make a much wider impact and actually get some real benefits out of it. But it's that same thing. It's definitely, I think the reason we haven't as an industry approached it before is it's a harder way to market and sell, because it is a general public, not just, here Coles buy it or here Woolworths buy it. It's, you've got to get that out into that wider representation. But I think if we can use like the slip, slop, slap kind of scenario, get it out there, really push that, that basic general awareness, which the government's doing a little bit of it now, which is great to see. But I think it needs to go past that just, MFA and just basic password. It needs to really push that education, but it's definitely a good start. And I think even with Cyber Unicorns, we've created that online cyber education platform for that space. And we've got a mobile app in a couple of weeks, which is really exciting to sort of really help drive that cyber education space. But yeah, it's going to be an industry-wide kind of problem. We're going to have to work a little bit better together, I think, to try and really push it out there. But yeah, hopefully one day you might see Cyber Unicorns in some sort of slip, slop, slap kind of campaign across TV and, billboards and everything else. I'm definitely not going to give up on it. I'm going to keep pushing it. So, because I think that is where we can get it.
I'm waiting for it. I can't wait to see it. But like you mentioned something there, which I think is important, Craig. Because like, do you think that something like this, like to have this kind of like campaign, let's call it, does require like so many different sectors of the community to really collaborate with each other? Like a lot of government input and the business sector and other types of communities out there. Yeah, well, I guess the question is like, do you think it really does require to have like quite collaborative approach, which might not currently be there?
I think so, because obviously, even, my organization, we could do that, we can push it out there, but if we don't really get, like, say, banking involved, we don't get, the seniors associations involved, and we don't get schools involved and education involved, like, we really need that come together to try and make this really engage and really work, because otherwise, on our own, we're not going to get that same impact. So it really needs to be that, how do we come together and sort of provide that wider sort of advice and that wider solution, because even government on their own can't do it all. We need to sort of, come together that little bit better. Otherwise, we're literally going to be doing what we've been doing for the last 10 years and, keep trying to do little bits here and little bits there, but nothing that with that wide impact that we really kind of need, particularly as we move into the space with, deepfake technology, with the voice cloning and video cloning. We really need to get that education as, at least that basics around, verifying. If someone calls you or someone talks to you, if it's from a random number, it doesn't make sense to you, verify it. Like, we need to really get those kind of conversations out there, particularly in that seniors group, because they are more trusting in their sort of, when they were growing up, in their sort of, day-to-day lives. Someone shook their hand and said they promised, like, made an agreement on something. They believed that. They were told something. There was no questioning. So we've got to change those habits a little bit and make them a little bit more suspicious. So, which is a hard thing to do, but just together it's the only way we're going to do it. If we, even cyber unicorns on their own, if we try and do that on our own, it's not going to work. We need to come together a bit more and do it together. But
Yeah, no, I totally agree on that. And you were saying as well, like, I mean, you're actually seeing it in your consultancy work, how a lot of it is trying to break down habits that people have had for, 10, 20 years. Do you think that we are swinging in the right direction from an educational point of view? And do you think that we'll see that in, the years to come, in like 5, 10, 15, 20 years down into the future, that the current status of education, as far like from a cybersecurity standpoint, for younger ages, is in the right place, or do you still think there's a bit of work to be done there?
I still think there's a little bit of work. I think we're definitely doing better. I think we're getting a lot more buy-in by sort of most general users. I think that's a lot of the media with the bigger breaches and things like that. We are getting a little bit more buy-in just because of those big sort of incidents. But I think we kind of do need to change our approach a little bit by trying to educate that little bit earlier in people's lives, like I said, with that primary or high school kind of space, so that we can uplift that, I guess you'd say, the base understanding before they get to corporate. I think that will make a big difference in the overall education, because we've sort of already got that basic understanding, the awareness around what is good and what is bad. You still get people that'll do the wrong thing. That's human nature. That's normal. But I think if we can at least start that a little bit earlier, I think that it should uplift the maturity right across the board to a point. We've just got to change that. I think stories is definitely a key. I think if we can change the way we approach it and make it a bit more engaging, a bit more fun, make it so that they do get that personal connection, we will make a bit more of a difference. But yeah, we're not quite there, but we are definitely getting better.
Yeah, well, that's promising, and it's good to hear that we're at least heading in the right direction. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about, you actually just touched on before, as far as the sort of the emerging technologies that could pose threats in the future. So, like, you used say that the deepfakes as an example. Just based on what you're seeing out there, Craig, what are some of the things that we should be looking ahead into the future for that could pose potential future security risks, and how we can kind of it's not an easy question to answer the last part, how we combat it, but at least what are some of the threats that we should be looking out for in the coming years?
I think definitely the ones I mentioned before, like with that voice cloning and deepfake. I think it is, because we've always, particularly in cyber education, we've always said, talk to someone, see somebody, and you can actually validate the real person you're talking to. But that is technically no longer the case. We need to take that extra verification step. And I think suspicion is, even though it's an odd thing to say, but building a little bit of that, standard suspicion on most things and then validating a lot of stuff, I think is a really good sort of key we have to teach. But yeah, deepfake is going to be a big problem, particularly, say, 18 months or 2 years ago. To do a video clone of me or yourself would probably take, days and days and days to put in the effort to try and make something that looked reasonable. these days you can get tools that on the dark web that'll actually do it for you in 20 minutes, as long as you've got enough samples to be able to sort of put a few things together, which people like ourselves that are out there a little bit more, is kind of easy to sort of do those sort of replicas. Most people will do it these days for, bigger paydays than what we could give them, which is nice for us. But I think there was an example like the Sunshine Coast, the new mayor for the Sunshine Coast. She used to be an ex-reporter, I can't think of her name, but they were using her face. They did a face swap in a Zoom call to get donations for some charity that she was supposedly supporting, and they got thousands and thousands of donations from local residents with her face swap in a Zoom call. So it is legitimately happening now as we speak. And I think the technology is going to get a little scary over the next 12 to 18 months, I think. And I think we need to, usually I talk about it a lot of the time in my sessions, like with you get the voice calls is probably the bigger one now. You get you get the I'm on the side of the road, waiting for a tow truck kind of thing scenario from your children, and can you pay for my tow truck or something? I always just say, hang up, literally hang up the phone, call the number you actually have, make any excuse you want, but hang up, call the number you have, validate that they actually, and 9 times out of 10 that when you ring that person, it'll actually tell you straight away that it's a scam call. So, but they are getting more commonplace, those kind of scenarios. So it's, deepfake and voice cloning is got to be something we need to figure out how to verify. I don't know if it's some sort of, I don't know. I usually say, do the verification by doing the hang up and call, or, find a secret phrase or a password you can exchange that only you and your family know, that you can ask them to validate they are a real person, which is a weird scenario, right? Because we can't trust what we see anymore. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, and particularly as that AI side really advances, where that next stage of that sort of process and what those next kind of threats is going to be. Yeah, it's going to be a little concerning for people like us. It's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I can see why that would be the case, and it sounds like there's certain aspects to it, like you're mentioning, that relate to, like, I remember when I was in school, for example, like just that sort of stranger danger type awareness type thing, where like if someone was coming to you, it'd be a case of you would have, say, like a phrase that only a family member would be aware of. So like, it sounds like some of those things can be easily translated to what we're talking about now. But I mean, for example, that case where you had someone impersonating a news reporter on a Zoom call, I mean, I find it difficult to see how you can kind of
it's difficult, right?
like that happening. Yeah, there's like all these different areas, and it seems to touch on so many different areas of life where it could pose potential dangers. So yeah, I can see it being extraordinarily interesting times to ahead in the future, Craig, to see what's going on. But look, just like do you think there's some current things, Craig, in your sort of day-to-day work that you do, that challenges in cybersecurity that perhaps aren't getting enough attention, aren't getting due attention as much as it should?
I think probably some of the bigger stuff, like the deepfake and stuff we're talking about, is definitely sort of the issues. I think a lot of the time they don't get that real sort of coverage and sort of real sort of, I don't know, awareness for the user side, particularly on how easy they are now to do a lot of that stuff. I think probably a lot of the time organizations kind of don't get the basics right, which I think is a bit of a problem. I think we need to, as an industry and as people providing that sort of support, we need to work harder on that, particularly MFA and passwords. There's so many things we can do to make them a bit easier for people to adapt to. But deepfake and voice cloning is by far a big problem. And I think I would like to see, I guess, how AI is going to develop, and how, particularly when you're talking about the cryptography and how that's going to be sort of broken down, and how we're going to adapt to that and sort of keep our system safe. Because essentially, as soon as we get quantum computing and AI capability behind that, almost all of our security protections now become almost obsolete to a point, which is a little concerning. So I'm interested to see, and scared at the same time, of how that's going to play out over that sort of next, 5 to 10 years. I think will be quite entertaining. But usually it will be probably like the millennium, kind of turnover where they thought all the machines were going to just shut down and because of the time stuff. I think we'll find a solution before it comes up and everything will be fine. But yeah, it's a little concerning at this point. But
Yeah, concerning and entertaining is what I heard you say. So
yes.
It's a little bit of both in there. But
Yeah.
Craig, we are unfortunately coming towards the end of this conversation, and I suppose I think a good way to lead off with this would be if there was like one mindset that you would want anyone to adopt when it comes to cybersecurity. What do you think that would be, and how would you characterize that mindset you'd want people to have?
I think probably the biggest thing that could probably help a lot of general public corporations, like sort of general user space, I think is suspicion. I know it sounds like a weird thing to say, but literally if everyone can have at least a grain of suspicion in pretty much most of the communications that they do and most of the emails and things that they get, it will prevent a lot of sort of issues. So if you just always take things and go, does this look right? Is this something my sort of IT department would send me? Is it something my daughter or son would send me? Just have that slight bit of suspicion and then validate if you think it doesn't quite feel right. I think we'll be a lot more secure right across the board, just with that slight hint of suspicion. I think that's the key. Get a little suspicion. Either, it sounds funny, but I think it will definitely save people. So.
Yeah, great. And it sounds like it's a common thread that's, been woven through a lot of this conversation. So be skeptical, be suspicious of of certain things that are coming your way. You were mentioning this app that is due to come out in a couple of weeks at the time of this recording. Could you tell us a bit about what it is and what it's actually offering to people out there?
Yeah, no worries. It's essentially an extension of our online education platform. So it's a mobile app from Cyber Unicorns essentially. And what it is it's going to have your video content for your groups like your seniors, your mums and dads, your general public, and there's a kids sort of subscription. So it's $10 a month essentially, or 99 for a year. But what it is essentially it gives you the video content like you would get with some of your other awareness, but more my style of kind of getting that sort of topics across and sort of making them a little bit easier to understand. And then what I'm doing is I'm going to put in how-to guides, make it a little bit easier to turn MFA on for your social media accounts, for your basic kind of configuration, break down passwords, and give you access to, recordings from podcasts and things like that I've sort of a guest on as well, but really give you that general public and sort of that more vulnerable groups access easily to a bit more of that cyber education that usually you only get in that corporate space. So I want to make it a bit more accessible and a bit more easy, but essentially I want to make that app that go-to location, that nice, easy spot for, uplift that general maturity and kind of be the anchor point to that slip, slot, slap kind of discussion we had before. So kind of get the campaign out there, push that general awareness campaign and then give them somewhere to go for that little bit more, if that makes sense, and really drive that education home and hopefully make a little bit of a difference in the education space. But yeah, it's all a work in progress, but if we all stick together and we all keep pushing in that path, I think we'll get there. So.
Yeah, great. So it sounds like it's the vision for it is very much like a resource tool for everyone, depending on from all different walks of life, to be able to have this central place of like resources they can use to raise their education and awareness, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And do it in a language that is simple to understand and a little bit easier to understand. So I think it's not too technical. Give them that nice, raw, easy basics and hopefully slowly lift their understanding and their online safety, particularly when we're talking about mums and dads where you go, what you shouldn't share with kids' photos and things like that. And some of that, just some basic online safety as well. So it really dives deep into some of that stuff and even cyberbullying. So there's quite a bit to go through, but hopefully it'll be a nice, easy resource for everybody and sort of gradually uplift the whole general public. So that's the plan.
Craig, how can people find out more about yourself, the work you do, and Cyber Unicorns? How can people get in touch?
So the easiest way is through probably my website. So it's just cyberunicorns.com.au. But weirdly, as a security guy, if you Google me, I'm very, very easy to find, which is strange, which is very, very strange. But yeah, the website's probably the easiest way. And if, reach out, any questions, I'm pretty easygoing. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has. So it's pretty easy.
Yeah, great. It's so easy, Craig, that even even myself, this conversation might not even be you. It could just be a deep fake of
That's
Craig
true.
Porter,
You never know, right?
I've just generated, before I made it up.
You never know.
Oh no, but all jokes aside, Craig, I really appreciate you coming on today, and I've had a really enjoyable conversation, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at CyberCon. I'll be seeing you speak down there, so I'm looking forward to coming down there and seeing you talk more on these sorts of topics and themes. But Craig, thanks for coming on, and look forward to speaking to you again in future.
No worries, it's been a pleasure. But yeah, look forward to seeing you at Cybercon.